Hi, my name is Brian Sackett, and I want to speak with you today about ineffable spiritual experiences. And I think this is a paradoxical topic because ineffable means it's incapable of being put into words, or it's too sacred to describe. So when you try to describe something that can't be described, it is paradoxical. But we can point to those, and so I want to talk about some experiences I've had that fall into that category, and then I'd like to share with you a guided meditation that may give you a taste of what it's like to have a near-death experience. One of the reasons that I want to do this is that this kind of connecting more deeply with yourself helps you to get through suffering and other things that might be difficult to experience and to go through. So for me, the most difficult set of experiences I've had in my life was the 19 years that my wife dealt with her thyroid cancer, and then having her very quickly pass away from it. And this happened 3.5 years ago. And these techniques helped me to be present through this set of experiences, and then to be able to tolerate my grieving and my sadness. And so I think that these techniques are helpful to people for getting through life. So I've had a number of very powerful spiritual experiences. They started out when I was 3 years old and I fell out of a car that was going 60 miles an hour. I was knocked unconscious and I went into the light. There's a near-death experience researcher named P.M.H. Atwater who says that childhood, under 5 years old, near-death experiences are difficult to integrate and often will take 30 or 40 years for a person to make sense of that and to understand what happened. And I from my own experience, I can validate that. I went into the light, I was scared, and I didn't have actual memories during the time, but I've retrieved those memories in the work I've done subsequently to know that I was working there I was meeting a spiritual guide, a person that was telling me about my life and what was going to happen and some of my choices in that life. And that guide I was out of touch with for many, many years, but from some experiences that happened when, in the course of trying to help my wife with her thyroid cancer, she and I went down to the Brazilian healer, John of God, and had some experiences with him channeling dead Brazilian doctors, which I was skeptical about when I first went down. But as I saw things that I couldn't explain in terms of the laws of physics, for instance, him cutting open people without any anesthesia or antiseptic and having very little bleeding and no infections, things like that really opened me up to the possibility that there was something to this. From those experiences, I started being able to pick up inwardly the presence of entities. And I found that the same guide that I was working with when I was 3 showed up and wanted to work with me. That project, he said, we have a project for you if you're willing to take it on. And I said, okay. That project turned out to be, it involved a rewiring of my my nervous system or my structures. And it had a period for about 9 months where I felt like I was actually being burned from the inside, kind of like electric wires burning through my energy channels. One of the things I learned from all this is that when you have expectations about what's going to happen and what it should look like or sound like, those expectations can interfere with your ability to really pick up what is there. And so when I dropped wanting to see or hear these entities inwardly and allowed myself to recognize that they were communicating, and they were communicating in the form of deep felt feelings in my body, as well as just a direct knowing. I was skeptical about this for a while because I didn't know if I was just making up stuff in my head. And so I have worked for many years with a psychologist myself for self-growth purposes. And over the course of a few years, we did muscle testing that helped me confirm when it was something that I was making up or when it was true.
And Brian, what is muscle testing?
It's called applied kinesiology, and it was first developed, I first ran into it 40 some years ago. Chiropractors would use it. They would press on your arm, you would hold your arm up, they would press on your arm, and if it stayed strong, it meant that it was good for you. They were testing supplements that you held over your solar plexus. It turns out that it's a form of truth detector, because if I say my name is Brian, my arm will test strong. If I say my name is Mel, it goes weak. And it's not a conscious thing, and you can consciously try to resist it, and if it's not true, it will go weak. Now, muscle testing has been used in something called energy psychology for the last 10 or more years, and it's just a way of testing flows of energy, what you should be working on, things like that. But we used it to help me verify my intuition and to develop it.
How accurate is this?
It's not 100% accurate, I don't believe. I've had experiences where it seemed like it was strong and it was weak. One of the tricky parts of muscle testing is it seems to be very concrete and literal. And so how you phrase something can really affect it. I've also come across some people that seem to be reversed. They test strong on something that's false consistently. So I try to not use it for like predicting the future or fortune telling or whatever. I think that it's a tool that you have to keep using your own discernment, and it's just a source of input. I think it's a fairly reliable input. I would get, when I'm getting an intuitive direction from like an inner guide and I muscle test it, I feel like I'm in the maybe 90% range of accuracy. All of this stuff is subjective, and I think there probably is an absolute truth, but it gets filtered through our personalities and our minds and our emotions, and I think there's some distortions that can come in that way. So let me go back to some of these spiritual experiences. When I was a senior at Stanford University, I was a math major. I went to a presentation by Baba Ram Dass and Swami Muktananda. And Ram Dass led a meditation that was basically think of all your thoughts and feelings and sensations as a river going through time and space, and there's a bridge over the river, and there's awareness on that bridge of everything going through in time and space, including the thought of being on a bridge over a river. When I tried this meditation, I had no context for this experience. I was interested in spirituality, but had not had any personal experiences of it. When I did that meditation, I went out of time and space for the first time in my life. I went out of, I think, being trapped just in my mind. And where I felt was extreme bliss. And this bliss was so overwhelming that all I could do was sit there and feel it. Eventually I opened up my eyes and I looked around, and I was having a unitive experience, a sense of being one with everyone and everything, not just in our world, but in all of life, all of the universes. When I looked at people, they were glowing. I could see their auras. Haven't had that experience since, but when the program ended, we went outside. The trees had an aura. The asphalt was alive, and you could feel this sense of unity with it. I went home and I tried to go to sleep, and I was back at the beginning of the universe, the beginning of creation. And this was just flooding through me. And again, the only context I had was I was raised Catholic, and I could kind of put this in terms of sort of biblical things. So what happened was there was a yearning within God or awareness to create. But everything was God, so there was no way of creating because it was all uniform. So God came up with this clever thing of creating by making patterns between God and not God. And that was the first duality, the first split in consciousness. And each time there was a split, if there was consciousness in what was split off, it wanted to unify. There was a strong pull, a strong tug to unify. I followed this down through the creation of the archangels and the angels, of men and women, of all the animals, and there were just more and more complex levels of duality.
Brian, at this point I'd like to ask a question.
Yeah.
What was it about the presentation put on by Ram Dass and Muktananda that precipitated this experience? Have you thought about this?
I have. Ram Dass said he was the pitch man, and that Muktananda was the juice or the energy. Muktananda didn't speak English at that time. It was the first time he was here from India. And so he and some other swamis were sitting on the stage just chanting. But I think it was that. Muktananda was known as a Shaktipat guru. Shaktipat is the transmission of energy through the vehicle of the guru's body and energy system. And I've heard a number of people talk about having that sort of transmission that moved them out of ordinary reality just by looking at his picture, for instance. So I think that it was that.
Okay.
This was, the strongest experience in my life. Even to this day, I think that was the strongest experience I've ever had. It went on for several months. I couldn't eat or sleep for a week, and I ended up in Stanford Hospital for a month, being misdiagnosed. This was in 1970.
Mm-hmm.
So
what was the diagnosis?
the diagnosis was paranoid schizophrenia. Mm-hmm. It was clearly not the right diagnosis because, among other things, to be diagnosed with schizophrenia, you have to have symptoms for at least 6 months. This was before the days when they knew about spiritual emergence and spiritual emergency, which can mimic the signs of a psychotic break, but it's time limited. It usually is a 2-week to 2-month period where that's happening. And you can actually integrate and be whole without medication, without psychological treatment, if you're having a spiritual emergence. So, at any rate, talking about what happened, things like being able to travel out of my body, going way up into the universe, so where our Earth would look like an atom, or going down to where the atoms and molecules here would look like suns and galaxies. The meaningfulness of life off of the Earth was so immense and so significant that one of the things that happened to me in that experience was I lost contact with the meaningfulness of my human life and my human experiences. I didn't forget. I could remember those, but my attention was elsewhere because those had so little meaning compared to the rest of the immensity of the universe. So that's an example of a strong spiritual experience. If you want to learn more about that, there are several YouTubes in which I talk in much more detail about what happened in those experiences. What I want to focus on today is one more description of what's called a shared death experience, and then I want to do this meditation with you and have you have a taste of this yourself. So, so my wife had had thyroid cancer for 19 years. It was never in remission. These tumors kept growing and she kept having to have surgeries. But she had a good quality of life. We had a good life together. Up until the very end. And then, unbeknownst to us, this cancer mutated into an anaplastic form that spread everywhere and within a couple months took her life. The last 2 hours of her life, I was able to be in bed with her. She was up in San Francisco in the hospital. I was holding her and trying to help, among other things, calm her down because she couldn't get very much breath. Tumors had filled a whole lung, and she was scared. I was able to hold her. In the last hour of her life, something switched, and this just incredible feeling of joy and peace filled the room. And she was lying on my right, and I could feel this sense of presence that was her. You know, there's a sense of identity with each of us. I know that you're Mel. I can feel the Melness somehow. I could feel that this was my wife, Christy. But it was a bigger Christy. And the bigger, all I can say is, what I imagine is when we come into these bodies living in these three dimensions here with time, that we cram ourselves down somehow. We are more multidimensional than that. But just like a two-dimensional figure wouldn't understand our 3D world, my mind couldn't grasp who and what she was, except that it was Christy, and there was such love and peace coming through her. I was trying to grieve because I was losing my partner. But I couldn't grieve because this joy was so strong. I also was worried about my kids. They were standing around the bed watching their mom die. And if I would worry about them, that sense of joy would get cut off. It was like a switch, just a binary switch. And in fact, I found if I did anything but just concentrate on the experience of feeling her, that I was cut off from this incredible sense of joy. There is something really powerful happening. Chris and I had our issues. We were human beings. We had hurt each other in various ways. We didn't, we understood each other. We had a deep love, but there were things that bothered me about her and her about me. And all I can say is that somehow in this experience with this love and light coming through her, those issues didn't just dissolve, they resolved. They came to completion, and they're done. They just got done. All of a sudden, a lifetime of issues with her and me somehow was okay. And one of the ways I knew this was I had such a strong sense of she loved me unconditionally and would be with me always, and I loved her unconditionally, would be with her always, no matter what life brought her and me. So I don't want to go in, again, there's more detail about this on YouTube, on the web. And if you're curious, go look that up. I just wanted to give you a taste today of this, and now I want to, if it's okay, I want to go into a meditation that would hopefully help you have a taste of what I'm talking about.
Okay.
So what I suggest you do is uncross your arms and legs and just sit comfortably and close your eyes. And before you go too deeply into this, think of an issue or a question that you have that matters to you. And just get clear what that question or what that issue is, and then just set that aside. And you can close your eyes if you'd like, and what I'd like you to do is concentrate on your head. And what you're going to be focusing on isn't the thoughts that are there, and it's not the sensations that are in the head, but it's on what in you is aware of those thoughts and those sensations. So we're focusing on the sense of presence, of awareness in the head. Now, one of the things about this is you can't touch that awareness. It's not an object. You can't put your finger on what is aware. There's not a little guy in the head that's who's aware. It's a verb. It's just noticing. It's just plain pure awareness. So you might register this as a sense of presence. You might notice it as a sense of warmth. You might notice it as a stillness or an emptiness. And it's very important not to have any expectations about what you're noticing. So if you have expectations, that will be thoughts that will block your experience. So even if you're experiencing nothing, just accept that and be with it. And you can notice, for instance, whether as you're focusing your attention on this awareness, does that sense of presence or stillness increase? Does it stay the same? Does it diminish? So if I was working with you personally on this, I would stop and ask you at this point what you were noticing. So you can take a minute and just record in your mind what you're noticing. And then I'll invite you to expand that awareness down into your chest, into your heart particularly. And again, we're not trying to find the feelings here, the emotions here. We're sensing and noticing what's aware of those feelings. So it's also interesting, I think, to see, is this sense of presence any different than the presence up in the head? Does this stillness or warmth or calmness increase as you focus your attention on it? Is it any harder or any easier to find this presence in your heart than it is in your head? So again, just take note of what you're noticing here. And then we're going to expand this to one more place, which is your gut. So notice the presence or the awareness of what's aware of the sensations in your belly. Now, some of the people I've worked with this find themselves really noticing like their stomach tensing or gurgling or things like that. That's, again, focusing on what the awareness is aware of rather than focusing on the awareness. So this exercise does seem to help people get clearer in terms of their thoughts, their emotions, and their sensations in their body. And so you can accept that, but draw your attention back to what's aware of all this. So you can ask the same questions. Is it easier or more difficult to notice down here in the gut what's aware? Is it the same kind of awareness that's in the head and heart? Does it get stronger as you're paying more attention to it? And then you can be aware of all three simultaneously. And sometimes when I've done this with people, that seems to bring awareness of your awareness all through your body. So head, heart, gut, and even more grounded down to your feet. But just take a minute and notice that, stay with that. Now, when you're doing this on your own, you may want to do this at a slightly slower pace and just take more time and notice this. But I'm going to go through this at this pace for the purposes of this video. So now I want to invite you to notice the stillness that this brings. And in fact, the sense of emptiness. This is a way of contacting the void that's inside of all of us. And like a void that it would be out in space, there's darkness. And what I want to invite you to do is to give permission to fall more deeply into yourself here, into that darkness, into that void. So give yourself permission to have the thought and then just observe what happens. You might be suspended in the void, in the darkness, or you actually might feel like you're falling into it. You might feel like you're moving into a dark tunnel. And just see what your response is to that. Is there curiosity? Is there interest? Is there some fear? But just notice the sense of moving through the dark tunnel. And as you're moving through the dark tunnel, look around and see if anywhere in this darkness there is a light. If you do notice this light, I think you'll find that it's not a blinding light. It's not something you have to protect your eyes from. It's more a revealing light. As it gets more intense, it just illuminates more what's there. And again, in the experience I've had of working with people with this can be very subtle. But notice whether you have a sensation of moving towards that light. Whether, if you are moving towards the light, that it's accelerating towards that light. As you come closer, you may find that that light is all through you. It's all around and all through you. And if so, just look and feel and notice what you're seeing and feeling. Notice whether you're feeling like you're alone here, or whether there is a sense of other awareness, other consciousness, other beings. So as you're sensing in whatever way you notice this, again, it's really important to be okay with whatever you're noticing, even if there's not a sense of light here. But again, notice what's happening, what it feels like in you and in the room around you. So you remember I asked you to have a question or an issue. So pull that off the shelf and get that clearly in your mind and ask that question, or ask the light to comment about your issue. So just have the thought and then be open and receptive to whatever comes back. And this may come in the form of a knowing, may come in the form of words, may come in the form of emotions, may come in the form of images, deep body feelings. It's okay to just note down kind of the first thoughts that come into your mind. So make a note of that mentally. If you'd like, you can write it down after this. But let that go now, and then ask and see, is there anything the light wants to communicate to you? So open and be receptive, no matter what it is, what your experience is. Note that down. Now, I've had people report various experiences from this meditation. Some people have felt the presence of people that have passed on. Some people have had their specific questions answered in a way that was revealing and made sense to them. Some people got a profound transmission from that more open-ended question of what does the light want to communicate to you. So now there are various things that might have gotten in the way of this for you. When I work with people individually, we try to work through those as we're going. And there's some suggestions and pointers that can be done. And so that's part of the invitation here. If you'd like to contact me, my contact information will be available at the end of this video, and I'd be happy to interact with you. So Mel, any questions or comments about this?
I think we might be able to do the question and answer in a part 2.
Okay.
Thank you, Brian.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Brian, our last talk, which was about talking about ineffable spiritual experiences, we ended with kind of a guided meditation in which you led people to the experience of the awareness of presence. Could you talk a bit more about that? What is the awareness of presence, and what is presence?
Right. So to me, presence is it is the awareness itself. And as you become more aware of awareness, so it's a meta level of awareness, it's being aware of awareness, you notice that in various ways. And one of the words to describe that is presence. Mm-hmm. So there's a sense of consciousness, of intelligence, of maybe even wisdom, or observing that is tangible, and it's not stuck in our thinking, our emotions, or our body sensations. It seems to exist independently of it. And in fact, I would say that awareness is the outside of time and space thing through which all those thoughts and emotions and sensations flow. It doesn't seem to change, so it seems to me it's changeless and eternal. And I think it's what people mean when they talk about spirit, that we're spirits having this human experience.
There must be different degrees of this presence. I imagine that when it's not lost on me that presence is very similar to the word present. So is the sense of presence something that can exist only now?
I think it does exist only now, in the here and now, in the present moment. But I mean, there's many theories about this, right? That there is no such thing as time. All time has happened, so it's all present now. There's only now.
Right.
And so that has memories and it has projections of expectations.
But I think I'm aware that there's a degree of awareness of the present that can almost be the antidote to compulsive thinking, where people realize what thought is and how it can take them away from the present. They don't get wrapped up in they realize how getting wrapped up in compulsive thinking can be toxic and counterproductive to mental health.
Right.
Yeah.
I agree with that, and I think that you can strengthen this sense of presence by practice, by paying attention, by meditating on it. I've noticed in my own personal experience that as I meditate in more consistent time periods and things, that sense of presence definitely increases. It does bring a much greater degree of objectivity and clarity. So I talk a lot in my practice with people about two kinds of noticing. One is this kind of noticing that we're talking about now, but more commonly what people's noticing consists of is the critical kind of noticing. So that's not only taking objectively what's there, but it's adding a layer of thinking about it through comparison of what's being observed with a bunch of mental lists of qualities of things that are good or bad, for instance, or scary or dangerous or preferable. That critical kind of noticing takes us out of connection with this deeper self that we're talking about here, calling it presence.
Right. What kind of issues do you deal with in your psychological practice?
So I do deal with a variety of conditions. I specialize in working with people that are working through traumatic experiences or abuse, including sexual abuse up to and including ritual abuse. I work with people dealing with depression and anxiety. I also work with people that are going through spiritual emergence. So spiritual emergence in a nutshell is a strong spiritual experience that's highly transformative, like a near-death experience is a category of spiritual emergence, that is so powerful that a person has a hard time integrating it in their day-to-day life, and may have some problem in relationships because they're different, and the people that love them love the old them, not the new them.
Yeah.
So,
what is required to get a person through a spiritually transformative experience? What would allow the experience to mature, and what would stop the experience altogether and turn it into maybe something pathological?
well, I think the biggest ally in going through life, but particularly through a spiritual emergence, is developing this not judging witnessing capability, the ability to be with whatever is as it is and simply go through it. That kind of awareness helps these parts of us that don't like things, that have our preferences, to calm down and to even if it's like with the passing of my wife, that was heartbreaking, and yet this sense of presence helps you to tolerate it and go through it, and eventually to heal.
Right.
So I think I've lost some of your question. The end of your question was about
So in
what
other
makes
words,
it pathological, the spiritual emergence
yeah,
pathological.
Spiritual emergency or a spiritually transformative experience, if it's allowed to take its course, it can eventually resolve itself into something healthy and positive. And I would imagine that as a person is going through this process, it would be important not only for him to be accepting of it, but for the people who are around him to be accepting of it and to give him space.
Right. So in my own personal experience with this, what I was going through scared the crap out of people. The people, my girlfriend and the people I was living with, they didn't understand it at all. And when you are scared of something, then that's what having me end up being put into the mental ward of a hospital.
Right.
And I think there is some misinformation out about spiritual emergence. Some people are really afraid, like if you get locked up like I did and medicated, that will destroy the spiritual experience. I was going through these journeys out of body, these strong spiritual experiences for several months, despite about 4 weeks of being medicated with antipsychotic medication. I don't think it derailed my integration of it. It may have postponed it a little bit. I did get a strong reaction to another psychiatrist that after I was out of the hospital wanted to lock me up again. And that actually probably grounded me out of this wide open, expansive, loving space. And it contracted me. Fear contracts us out of these experiences. And so in that sense, I can't say that there was anything that should have happened differently. The way I look at what I went through is I had this experience that kind of booted me out of ordinary reality, lost touch with my humanity, and then it launched me for decades on exploration to find out what had happened to me.
Right.
And to be able to go into these kinds of I don't know what to call them, spiritual experiences or states of consciousness without losing myself, with the ability to integrate what's happened and to make sense of it.
Yeah. What advice would you give psychotherapists to help a person integrate this experience? What kind of milieu or environment or psychological atmosphere would you encourage a therapist to engage in with the client in order to make the experience healthy for them?
Okay, so there's several factors in here. One of the things I would say is be very careful about the assumptions you're making about what's happening. You, the therapist, working with somebody with this, be much more in your curiosity and really try to draw the person out with questions and with acceptance rather than judgment and diagnosis. I do think that there are people that go through spiritual emergence that have a combination of spiritual emergence and some genuine biochemical condition like bipolar disorder that is very complicated then to deal with. I've worked with a number of cases of that in my practice. In that kind of case, I would recommend you find somebody who has expertise in this area because it's really complicated. But for somebody who's not got a huge trauma background where there's complex dissociation and developmental interruption, or someone who's not going through something biochemical in addition to the spiritual emergence, just helping them, reassure them that they'll get through this, that the best thing to do is to surrender to the process and use non-judging noticing to help your thoughts and your emotions get through this, are the best thing you can do for a person in spiritual emergence.
Brian, how would you define the essence of mental health?
Well, on a fundamental level, I would say you're mentally healthy if you can tolerate what you think and what you feel. Another part of it would be to understand what are the unconscious patterns, especially the defensive patterns that have helped you get through life and survive. Many of those really were necessary when we were very young, but have unintended side effects now as an adult. But we're unconsciously stuck to them. So learning what those are and working through these patterns, working with the protective parts of self to retrain them to better tactics, all of that's involved in mental health.
How is your work as a psychologist and your experiences with your spiritual experiences, how is that, how do you see that as changing your life for the better?
Well, I've watched many spiritual groups and people going through spiritual transformations, and I've seen some of those that have not had a psychological component to that spiritual growth. And often what I see there is a form of spiritual bypass, where they don't really deal with underlying conditions like early childhood trauma, and they're stuck. They can't proceed completely on their spiritual path because they're not dealing with something that's fundamental that needs to be dealt with.
Mm-hmm.
Similarly, I think that people that just attend to psychology without taking in the spiritual component can end up ignoring things that are really important for self-actualization, for instance, for being fully who they can be.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that the combination of psychological work and psychological insight, along with spiritual growth and spiritual transformation, are a very powerful combination. And I see that that's helped me. I've had to walk my talk, like with the death of my wife and all of that. And I think both my psychological work on my own trauma, like from falling out of the car, and my spiritual work helped me to go through that with some bit of grace and resiliency. I don't know that you asked this, but I'll answer this anyway. I noticed that in my growth as a therapist, as a psychologist, at first, the only thing I used my spirituality for was, I think it gave me a sense of deeper awareness and empathy. But I kept those two things completely separate for some years. Not wanting to, for instance, alienate some just regular Silicon Valley clients that don't have that belief system. Over time, I've had it appear more and more overtly. For a time, I learned how to language some of these spiritual resources in terms of language that was stripped of the spiritual trappings, but we're operating on those principles, and I found that very helpful for people, even if they didn't have a spiritual belief system. But now I'm seeing that some of these conditions, like the trauma that comes from incest, for instance, or deep childhood abuse, really only gets healed if you have the combination of psychology and spirituality and spiritual resources. So now I'm working overtly to bring the both of those together for the benefit of my clients.
Last question. How would you define the word spirituality?
Spirituality. You know, my definition is fairly practical, I think. It's connecting with the part of us that's permanent, that doesn't just come and go. So our thoughts come and go, our emotions come and go, our body sensations come and go. They're coming and going through something. So I like this metaphor of there's a river containing everything in time and space, but there's a riverbed of awareness that's changeless through which all that goes. And spirituality to me is the combination of both. It's the transcendent observing that's changeless, as well as what's temporary and human that does come and go. So I think that's probably the best I can do in terms of trying to define spirituality. It's ineffable.
Okay, on that note, Brian, thank you so much.
All right, thank you, Mel. Appreciate it. So I think I've learned a lot from all of these spiritual things that have happened to me in my life. Not just spiritual stuff, but really difficult emotional stuff. It is traumatic to watch your wife struggle with cancer for so many years and then die. It was traumatic falling out of the car and being in pain, and being told by my parents, "Oh, you were fine, you just had some 10 stitches in your head." And it was also getting locked up in a mental hospital and being diagnosed as paranoid schizophrenic was distressing. And it generated a fair amount of fear in me. That fear only eased 20 years later when I found a group of people that had nearly identical experiences, and I listened to other people's stories that were very much like mine.
Yeah. What was your state of mind during the 20 years before you found the group of people?
I was curious. I was afraid it could happen again. I wanted to...
Did you question your sanity?
Not consciously, but when I had this group experience, something in my chest eased. And I think it was the fear underneath unconsciously that I was crazy. That I was making all this up. So I think that there's a lot of people in the same boat, a lot of people that have been disconfirmed by what our cultural beliefs have been about spirituality and entities and deceased people and things like that. And I think that there's something to offer from this. And so being able to speak up about it and then learn more how to speak up about it and what people are really interested in has been a good process for me. And it helps me feel like I'm giving back, because I've been helped by various people through these spiritual experiences, and then trying to unpack what happened and make sense of them, and also to make sense of the traumas and things. So I like it because it feels like I'm being more me. I'm owning more of who I am, even in the face of maybe disbelief or criticism. And I think that's valuable for me personally. So it's not only am I giving something to people, I'm really receiving something by going through this process.